Tasha sat quietly in front of the bathroom mirror, her hand resting on the counter. The reflection staring back at her wasn't the woman she had been just a year ago. The pregnancy had been an exciting time, a time of anticipation, hope, and joy. When she first found out she was expecting, Jason had been overjoyed, practically glowing with excitement. He had been so attentive, so loving, as if he couldn't wait to embark on this new chapter together. During her pregnancy, Jason had been the perfect partner, doting on her, making sure she was comfortable, and often surprising her with small gestures. He'd even enrolled them both in prenatal yoga classes, hoping to stay as active and connected as possible during the pregnancy. Tasha had always admired how much Jason supported her during those months. He'd been there for every doctor's appointment, every ultrasound. There were moments she would never forget, like the time he held her hand, while she cried over swollen feet, or when he surprised her with a spa day to pamper her before the baby arrived. He had been everything she thought she wanted in a husband, everything she needed in a partner. But once their son, Elijah, was born, the magic of their early relationship started to dissipate. The first few weeks were a blur of sleepless nights and diaper changes. Tasha found herself sinking into a new routine, one that centered entirely around Elijah. Her body was healing, but it felt foreign to her. The soft, round belly she had once proudly carried their child with had left behind marks, stretch marks that told the story of pregnancy and motherhood. Her breasts, once perky and firm, were now fuller and sagging with the demands of nursing. The weight she had gained during pregnancy didn't just appear on her hips, it seemed to settle into every part of her body. Her self-image was shaken. The woman in the mirror no longer resembled the woman Jason had married, yet she didn't expect him to see her as she had once been. She had always been realistic about the physical changes motherhood would bring. What hurt more than the physical changes, though, was the emotional distance she began to feel between herself and Jason. Jason, on the other hand, seemed to change in ways Tasha couldn't fully understand. He had stopped showing up for her in the ways he used to. The compliments he used to shower her with were fewer and further between, and his touch had become more absent, more distant. He started to criticize things that never bothered him before. The way she dressed, the way she looked, but it wasn't just about her appearance. Tasha began to sense that Jason's affection was no longer the unconditional love it once had been. It felt transactional, as though her worth had become tied to her physical appearance. One morning, after a sleepless night spent comforting Elijah, Tasha had decided to get dressed for the day. She had finally found a moment to care for herself, a fleeting moment when she didn't have to think about the needs of everyone else. She chose a soft, light blue robe and stood before the mirror, adjusting it as best she could over her still healing body. As she caught a glimpse of her reflection, she tried to see herself through the lens of self-love, to remind herself that she was more than the body she had lost, more than the stretch marks and the weight. But the reflection staring back at her wasn't easy to accept. Before she could even find the words to quiet the self-doubt, Jason walked into the room. His eyes immediately scanned her body, and Tasha could feel the familiar weight of his gaze, a look she hadn't seen in months, a look that felt cold, critical, and distant. "You've really let yourself go, haven't you?" His voice was sharp, the words coming out without hesitation, as if he had been waiting to say them for some time. "You used to be so attractive. Now you're just fat." The sting of his words hit her like a slap in the face. The warmth of the moment, the one she had hoped for when she finally found a moment for herself, dissolved in an instant. Her chest tightened, and her breath caught in her throat. The man who had once held her in such high regard, the man who had marveled at her strength during her pregnancy, was now standing before her, reducing her to a mere reflection of her physical appearance. Tasha's heart felt heavy, her hands trembling as she adjusted the robe around her body, trying to cover up the damage she had already felt from his words. She wanted to respond, wanted to explain how exhausting motherhood had been, how she barely had time to shower, let alone worry about her appearance. But the words wouldn't come out. Jason wasn't listening. He continued, his words slicing through the air like daggers. "I can't do this anymore. I need someone who takes care of themselves. I'm seeing someone else." The air between them seemed to grow still, as if the world had suddenly stopped turning. Tasha's breath caught, and for a moment, everything went blank. She didn't know whether she should cry, scream, or run. She stood there, frozen, her heart pounding in her chest. Jason's words didn't just break her heart. They shattered the illusion she had built for years, that her marriage, her family, was something sacred and invulnerable. She had given everything to this man, to this family, and in return, she was left standing there, exposed and broken. Jason didn't look back at her as he walked out of the room. There was no apology, no sympathy. His back was to her as he left, closing the door softly behind him. Tasha's knees gave way, and she sank to the floor, her hands clutching the robe tighter, as if it could protect her from the pain. The tears began to fall, not just from the hurt of his betrayal, but from the overwhelming feeling of being alone. The life they had built together, the life she had imagined for herself, for her son, was slipping through her fingers, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Weeks had passed since Jason's cruel words, and Tasha had tried to move on in the only way she knew how, by focusing on their son, Elijah. Every morning, she woke up early, caring for him, trying to make sense of her new reality as a single mother. She had grown used to the exhaustion, the endless feedings and diaper changes, the relentless pressure to be both mother and father to their child. In some ways, motherhood had given her purpose again. It filled the emptiness Jason's absence had left, and each little milestone Elijah reached felt like a victory, a testament to her strength. But while she poured herself into her role as a mother, the hurt from Jason's words never fully left her heart. The emotional wound he had inflicted was still raw, and it festered beneath the surface. Every time she caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror, she was reminded of the woman she used to be, the woman she thought Jason still saw her as. The betrayal of his harsh words haunted her, and it made her question her own worth. Was she really just fat to him now? Had everything she was to him before been a lie? Despite her efforts to push through, there was always a lingering sense of loss, a sense that something important had slipped through her fingers. The days began to blend into one another, and Tasha found herself replaying the moments leading up to Jason's departure, trying to make sense of it all. What had happened to the man who used to adore her? Where was the partner who supported her through pregnancy, who seemed so eager to build a life together? But as she cleaned the house one evening, her attention was drawn to a sound, a familiar voice coming from the hallway, muffled but clear enough for her to hear. "I can't wait to be with you tonight," Jason's voice said, his tone filled with excitement. "You're everything I need now, Maya. Tasha is just too much. She doesn't care about herself anymore." The words struck Tasha like a knife to the chest. Her heart skipped a beat as the name Maya echoed in her mind, but it wasn't just the name that hit her hardest. It was the realization that Jason, the man she had loved, the father of her child, was speaking so easily, so casually, about being with someone else, someone who had already replaced her in his heart, Maya. A woman whose name Tasha hadn't heard until now, but whose existence had already begun to feel like a shadow in her life. In that moment, everything came crashing down. The betrayal wasn't just about Jason leaving her physically. It was about how he had discarded the woman he promised to love, how he had cast aside their years of memories for someone who wasn't part of their story. The reality of his emotional abandonment stung even worse than the physical one. Her legs felt weak as she leaned against the doorframe, her hand clutching her chest. Every word Jason spoke was like a punch, the emotional weight making it hard to breathe. "I can't do this anymore," he had said. "Tasha is just too much." Tasha didn't even realize she was crying until the tears started to fall, hot and fast, down her cheeks. Was that how he saw me now? Just too much? The words felt like an indictment, like a judgment that she had failed. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that it wasn't about her at all. It was about him, his insecurities, his inability to handle her changes, her growth as a person, and his own need for validation. The next day, Tasha confronted Jason. Her heart was pounding in her chest as she stood in their living room, holding Elijah in her arms. She had prepared herself for this moment for what felt like forever. She needed the truth, needed to know what had been happening behind her back. Jason looked at her with an expression of exhaustion, like he had already mentally checked out long ago. His eyes were vacant, distant. "I don't want to be here anymore, Tasha," he said, his voice cold, as though he had already made peace with his decision. "I'm leaving you for her." Tasha's world seemed to stop. She couldn't breathe. She felt like the floor had been ripped from beneath her, and she was falling into an abyss. The silence between them was deafening. Her throat tightened, and her words came out like whispers. "Just like that? You're really leaving?" Jason didn't even look ashamed. There was no apology, no remorse in his eyes. He had already checked out of their marriage long before this confrontation. "You're not the woman I married anymore, Tasha," he said, as if the weight of her post-pregnancy body had completely overshadowed the woman she was. "I need someone who takes care of themselves, someone who values themselves. You don't care about yourself, so I'm done." Tasha stood frozen, unable to find the strength to speak. Her chest felt tight, suffocating, as though the love she had once poured into him had evaporated into thin air. This man, this person who had once made her feel beautiful, strong, and capable, was now telling her she wasn't enough. Her heart ached with the realization that all the sacrifices she had made, all the love she had given, meant nothing to him in the end. Jason turned to walk out, leaving Tasha standing there, clutching Elijah in her arms. The house felt too big, too empty without him, and the walls, once filled with laughter and love, now felt suffocating, cold. As Jason walked away from their marriage, the weight of her emotions came crashing down. Anger, disbelief, sadness, all of it mixed together in a tidal wave of grief. She had loved him, she had trusted him, and now he was walking out the door, leaving her to pick up the pieces. But it wasn't just Jason she had to rebuild from. It was herself. Tasha's heart ached, but as she stood there, holding Elijah, she realized something. She wasn't just a wife. She wasn't just a mother. She was a woman who had dreams, hopes, and a life to live beyond her marriage. And though it would take time, she knew she would have to find herself again. Not for Jason, not for anyone else, but for her. Tasha didn't have the answers yet, but she knew one thing for sure. She would not let this heartbreak define her. She would rise above it. The days after Jason left felt like a blur. Tasha couldn't remember the exact moment when the weight of his departure hit her the hardest, but she knew it was when she realized not just that he had abandoned her, but that he had abandoned Elijah too. Jason had walked out the door with a calmness that made Tasha feel like she was living in someone else's nightmare. His lack of remorse was almost more painful than the betrayal itself. She had known he was no longer emotionally invested in their marriage, but it was the emotional abandonment of Elijah that truly shattered her. She couldn't imagine how he could leave their son behind, the very child they had both promised to protect, to love, to raise together. In the months that followed, Tasha was forced to take on the heavy load of motherhood alone. She didn't have a choice. Elijah needed her, and in his bright, trusting eyes, she saw both her strength and her fragility. Every time he cried for his father, every time he reached out for someone who was no longer there, Tasha's heart cracked just a little bit more. The emotional toll of being a mother without the support of a partner, without the person who had vowed to share this burden, was crushing. Jason's absence wasn't just a void in their home, it was a deep wound. Tasha found herself silently grieving for both her own loss and Elijah's. How would her son grow up without his father? Would he understand why Jason wasn't there? Why the man who had once promised to love him wasn't coming back? Would he resent her one day for allowing Jason to leave, even though she had no control over it? At night, when the silence of the house felt too heavy, Tasha would hold Elijah close, wishing for the comfort of the family they should have had. But even in her darkest moments, she knew she couldn't let herself fall apart completely. Elijah was watching her. She could not show him weakness, could not let him see her cry without understanding that it was okay to grieve. But at the same time, she had to remain strong for him, for herself. One morning, after another sleepless night spent comforting Elijah, Tasha stood in front of the bathroom mirror once again. She had come to dread this moment, the time when she would catch a glimpse of the woman she used to be and the woman she was becoming. But today, there was something different. She didn't look at herself with self-loathing or sorrow. She looked at herself with a quiet determination. The woman in the mirror was no longer the woman Jason had discarded. She wasn't the woman who had been abandoned and left to pick up the pieces of a broken heart. She was someone stronger, someone capable of rising from the ashes, despite everything that had happened. The pain wasn't gone, but it was no longer the thing that defined her. The reflection staring back at her wasn't one of defeat. It was a woman ready to take control of her life, ready to make a change. And so, Tasha decided to move forward, not for Jason, not for anyone else, but for herself. It started slowly. Long walks with Elijah in the stroller became her morning routine, a way to clear her mind, to process the grief, and to just breathe. During those walks, she would find herself looking at other mothers, other women who seemed to have it all together, and she realized that the only way she would ever be at peace with her own life was to stop comparing herself to others. She needed to embrace her own journey, however difficult it may be. On days when Elijah napped, Tasha would do small workouts in her living room. Push-ups, squats, and basic stretches became her way of reclaiming something for herself, of taking ownership of her body in a way she hadn't felt able to do since pregnancy. She knew it wasn't just about losing the weight or fitting into the clothes she once wore. It was about reclaiming her sense of self. Then one day, while browsing the local gym in their neighborhood, Tasha made a decision. She signed up. It wasn't just about fitness. It was about taking control of her life. She needed to feel powerful again, not just physically, but emotionally and mentally. She needed to know that despite everything that had happened, she could still stand tall and rebuild. It was there, at the gym, that she met Devon. He was a personal trainer, but more than that, he was a guide, a mentor who saw potential in her before she saw it in herself. Devon was kind, but also relentless. He didn't let her use excuses, and slowly, with his encouragement, Tasha began to push herself further than she thought possible. The workouts were tough, often leaving her breathless and sore, but she didn't give up. Each drop of sweat, each aching muscle, was a reminder that she was doing this for herself. Devon saw the change in her before anyone else did. "You've come so far," he said one day after a particularly tough session. His voice was full of admiration, his eyes glowing with respect. "You're not just changing your body, you're changing your life." Tasha smiled, wiping the sweat from her brow. She felt a sense of pride she hadn't felt in years. The woman who once felt invisible, the woman who had believed herself to be unworthy of love, was now standing tall, radiating strength. She could feel her spirit transforming, becoming more confident, more determined, and more in control of her life with each passing day. It wasn't just about the physical transformation, although that was certainly a part of it. It was about the internal shift she had undergone. She had stopped seeing herself through Jason's eyes. She had stopped measuring her worth based on someone else's expectations. Instead, she had started to see herself through her own eyes that now saw a woman who was capable of achieving everything she wanted, regardless of what had been taken from her. The journey was far from over, but Tasha was no longer lost. She was on her way to becoming the woman she had always been meant to be, a woman who would no longer settle for less than she deserved. After walking away from his family, Jason believed he had found something better with Maya. She was everything Tasha wasn't, or so he thought. She was young, vibrant, and seemed to offer him the attention he had been craving. In his mind, she was everything he had been missing: confident, carefree, and unapologetically bold. But as the weeks turned into months, Jason began to realize that the relationship he thought he had with Maya was starting to feel more like a game that, unbeknownst to him, he was losing. Maya's beauty was undeniable. Her light caramel skin, sharp features, and flowing locks were enough to turn heads wherever they went. But beyond her physical allure, Jason was drawn to something else: the way she carried herself with an air of wealth and sophistication. She didn't just like nice things, she demanded them, and Jason, eager to please her, had started to indulge her in ways he never had with Tasha. At first, it was small things: dinners at fancy restaurants, weekend getaways to resorts, designer bags that cost more than his car payments. Maya's requests were always framed as innocent suggestions. "Wouldn't it be nice to go shopping this weekend? Just a little spree to make me feel special," she'd say, flashing him a smile that made it impossible for Jason to say no. But as time went on, the requests became demands. Her once playful comments about his financial generosity morphed into full-blown expectations. Maya didn't even bother to hide the way she casually mentioned how much she needed new things: new clothes, new shoes, new jewelry. She made it sound so casual, like it was something that just came with the territory of being with her. One evening, as they sat in his apartment, Maya leaned in close, her eyes sparkling with excitement as she spoke. "Jason, I've been thinking," she started, her fingers lightly tracing the rim of her wine glass. "You know what would make me really happy? A shopping spree. I've had my eye on some things, and well, I think we both deserve it." Jason, still basking in the attention she showered him with, nodded eagerly. "Yeah, of course. What do you want? I can make it happen. Whatever you need." Maya's smile widened, but there was something calculating behind it. "I was thinking maybe a couple of credit cards. Just for me, of course. I promise I'll pay them off quickly." She said this with such ease, as if it was a completely normal request. Jason, who had always enjoyed the thrill of spoiling someone, didn't even hesitate. "Sure, I'll get you whatever you want." His mind raced, thinking about how much he enjoyed the way Maya made him feel, how important and desired he was in her eyes. It was intoxicating, and he didn't want to risk losing that by questioning her motives. Weeks passed, and the spending continued. Maya was rarely without a new pair of shoes or a new dress. Jason was only too happy to oblige, convincing himself that this was the price he paid for the kind of woman he wanted: someone who was beautiful, confident, and who clearly appreciated his generosity. He told himself that this was just how it worked when you were with someone like Maya. She was special. She deserved it. One afternoon, Maya suggested another lavish shopping spree. This time, it wasn't just for clothes. She wanted furniture, decor for her apartment, even a new car. "I think I should get a new ride," she said. lounging on his couch, casually flipping through a magazine. Something sleek, you know, something that really matches my style. Jason, still wrapped up in the illusion of this perfect relationship, didn't stop to think about how much she was asking for, or how much he was giving. Instead, he smiled and nodded. "Yeah, whatever you want, babe. I'll take care of it." But even as he agreed, a small voice inside him began to stir, something that whispered that maybe he was being taken for a fool. He tried to ignore it, dismissing the voice as paranoia. He had been with Maya long enough to know that the materialistic demands came with the territory. Besides, he told himself, it wasn't like he couldn't afford it. What harm was there in keeping Maya happy? As the days went on, Jason began to notice that the balance in their relationship had shifted. What had started as passion and excitement was beginning to feel more like an obligation. Maya's sweet smiles now came with the unspoken expectation that he would keep buying, keep giving, keep supporting her increasingly lavish lifestyle. And each time he opened his wallet, he found himself sinking deeper into a hole he couldn't quite see. A hole filled with designer bags, expensive dinners, and promises of things he couldn't afford. But what really bothered Jason, what he couldn't quite shake, was the nagging feeling that something was off, the way Maya seemed to only care about the material things he could provide, the way she rarely initiated any conversation that didn't revolve around money or gifts. It was as though her affection for him was tied directly to his bank account. Still, he couldn't bring himself to question her. In his mind, she was everything he wanted, everything he thought he deserved, and the more he gave her, the more he convinced himself that he was finally getting it right. But what Jason didn't realize, what he couldn't see, was that Maya was playing a much bigger game. Her love for him wasn't real. It wasn't about affection or connection. It was about power and control. And the more he gave her, the more she took. Soon, she would have him exactly where she wanted him. The first few months after Jason left had been the hardest Tasha had ever experienced. But now, as she looked back, she saw something different. The woman who had stood frozen in that bathroom, devastated by Jason's words, no longer existed. She had emerged from the wreckage of her broken marriage stronger, sharper, and more determined than ever. Tasha was hitting the gym hard now. It wasn't just about the weight loss. It was about proving to herself that she could still be the woman she once was, and even better, she had made a commitment to herself that nothing, not even the deepest hurt, would stop her from getting back on her feet. The hours spent with Devon at the gym, sweating through each grueling workout, were paying off. Every drop of sweat was a symbol of her resilience, every sore muscle, a reminder that she was capable of achieving more than she'd ever thought possible. But Tasha knew that getting back into shape physically was only part of the equation. She needed stability for herself and Elijah, and that meant finding a steady job. With the little savings she had left, she enrolled in job training programs that would allow her to build a career while still being present for her son. It wasn't easy. Early mornings, late nights, and some stressful days trying to balance her job search, Elijah's needs, and her workouts. But every time she got a call for an interview or a lead on a job, she could feel the momentum shifting in her favor. Eventually, she landed a job at a local health clinic as a receptionist. It wasn't her dream job, but it was a start. The schedule was consistent, and the pay allowed her to breathe again. It also gave her the flexibility to keep pushing forward with her fitness routine and, most importantly, be the mother Elijah needed. She could finally afford consistent childcare, something that had been impossible when Jason was around. Tasha hired a reliable babysitter, someone she could trust, and for the first time in months, she didn't have to worry about leaving Elijah with a stranger. The freedom to focus on her career and herself, without feeling guilty, was a game changer. Elijah was changing too. The days of his constant tears, his longing for his father, were slowly becoming a distant memory. Tasha had worked hard to keep their bond strong, making sure he knew he was loved and cared for, despite Jason's absence. Now Elijah was thriving. He was a happy, energetic child, smiling at the world around him without the shadow of his father's departure hanging over him. Every time he laughed, every time he reached out to hug her, Tasha felt a sense of pride. She had done this. She had made him feel safe and secure, and she was showing him the strength that he would carry into his own life one day. As Tasha continued to push herself at the gym, her weight was slowly dropping. It wasn't a dramatic transformation, but it was steady and noticeable. More importantly, her confidence was rising faster than she could have imagined. Every time she passed a mirror at the gym and saw the strong woman looking back at her, it reminded her of everything she had overcome. She was no longer a shadow of the woman Jason had rejected. She was becoming someone new, someone powerful. Her self-esteem was growing in other ways too. She had started dressing differently, wearing clothes that made her feel good about herself, instead of hiding behind oversized sweaters or baggy pants. The woman who used to look in the mirror and see a failure now saw a force to be reckoned with. She was no longer the wife who was discarded for someone younger and thinner. She was a mother, a woman, and a warrior in her own right. Even her interactions with others began to change. Tasha wasn't looking for validation anymore, but she was getting it in small ways, from her friends, from co-workers, from even strangers at the gym. People were beginning to notice the transformation, not just physically, but emotionally. She was the same person, but stronger, more whole, more grounded. One afternoon, while she was picking Elijah up from daycare, she overheard a woman complimenting her. "That's Tasha, right?" the woman asked. "She's really been killing it lately. I see her at the gym, always working so hard. She looks amazing." Tasha didn't know whether to laugh or cry. It was the first time someone had acknowledged her progress in such a public way, and it felt incredible. She wasn't just invisible anymore. She was being seen. She was being respected. It was like the world was starting to recognize the woman she had always been inside, the woman she had been fighting to find again. At night, after Elijah went to bed, Tasha would lay in her own bed, exhausted but satisfied, replaying the day's victories in her mind. Every accomplishment, no matter how small, added another layer of confidence, another brick in the foundation she was building for her future. She knew it wasn't just about getting her body back. It was about getting her life back. Every step forward was a promise to herself that she would never settle for less than she deserved. And most importantly, every step forward meant that she was closer to the woman she had been before Jason had torn her apart. But now she was stronger, more self-assured, and ready to show the world, especially Jason, that she was more than just a discarded ex-wife. Tasha had always been focused on her son, her fitness, and rebuilding her life after the heartbreak that Jason had left behind. But as the weeks turned into months, she began to realize something. She was missing something. Not someone, necessarily, but a spark. The kind of spark she hadn't felt in years. It wasn't that she was desperate for love, but there was a deep part of her that wondered if she could ever truly be happy again, with someone who saw her for the woman she was becoming, not just her past mistakes. It happened one afternoon when she was picking Elijah up from daycare. She had just finished a quick workout and was running a little late to pick him up. As she walked through the door, wiping the sweat from her brow, she noticed a new face at the front desk, a man with a warm smile and kind eyes, wearing a navy polo and khaki pants. He looked up when she walked in, and for a moment, their gazes locked. His eyes were a deep brown, kind but curious, and there was something about the way he smiled that made her feel at ease. She had seen him around before, but had never really paid attention. Today, however, something felt different. She caught herself staring a little longer than usual, and when she turned away, she was aware of the heat rising in her cheeks. "Hi," he said, his voice smooth but genuine. "You must be Tasha. I'm Devon, Elijah's new teacher." Tasha smiled, though she felt slightly awkward. "Nice to meet you. I'm sorry, I didn't realize you were new here." Devon chuckled, the sound warm and easy. "I'm not new, actually. Just started working more directly with the kids recently, but Elijah's a bright one. He's been a joy to teach." Tasha's heart swelled with pride. "Oh, I'm so glad to hear that. He's been through a lot lately, and it's good to know he's in good hands." Devon smiled again, his expression softening. "Kids are resilient, you know. They bounce back faster than we give them credit for." There was a quiet pause between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt more like an unspoken understanding, the kind that only two people who had faced their own struggles could share. It was a simple moment, just a brief exchange, but it felt significant, like a door that had slowly creaked open, just wide enough for something new to step in. Over the next few weeks, Tasha found herself running into Devon more often, either picking Elijah up or seeing him at the gym where she had been working out. He would always greet her with the same easy smile and friendly demeanor, asking how her day was or complimenting her progress. There was no pressure, no overt flirtation, just genuine conversation, and an ease that made her feel comfortable. Tasha couldn't help but notice the way he treated her, not as a single mother, but as a whole person, someone who had been through a lot and was still standing tall. Devon didn't seem intimidated by her strength or her past. In fact, he seemed to admire it, and that was new for Tasha. With Jason, she had always felt like she was just a piece of someone else's life, someone who was there to support him, to make him feel better about himself. With Devon, it felt different. He made her feel like she mattered, like she had something to offer that wasn't defined by the men in her life, but by who she was as an individual. One evening, as she was leaving the gym, Devon caught up with her, sweat glistening on his forehead from his own workout. "You've been killing it, Tasha," he said, genuine admiration in his voice. "I can't remember the last time I saw someone push themselves the way you do. It's inspiring." Tasha smiled, a little surprised by the compliment. She had gotten used to hearing praise for her body, for her looks, but this was different. "Thanks, Devon. That means a lot coming from you." "Hey," he said, his tone shifting slightly, more playful. "How about we grab a coffee sometime? I've been thinking we could talk more about life, fitness, whatever." Tasha paused. She hadn't been on a date since Jason left, and the thought of it made her feel both nervous and excited. It wasn't that she wasn't ready, but it felt strange to open up again. But at the same time, Devon felt safe. He had no expectations, no ulterior motives. He wasn't rushing her. He wasn't pressuring her to be anything other than herself. "I'd like that," she said, smiling for the first time in a long time at the thought of someone, new in her life. As they set the date for their coffee, Tasha couldn't help but feel a sense of possibility creeping in. She wasn't just Tasha, the woman who had been abandoned. She was Tasha, the woman who was choosing to move forward. And maybe, just maybe, there was room in her life for someone like Devon. Tasha couldn't remember the last time she'd felt so nervous about something that wasn't related to Elijah's well-being. She sat in the corner booth of the small local cafe where she'd agreed to meet Devon for coffee, her hands wrapped around the warm mug, trying to calm the fluttering in her chest. It wasn't just the coffee that was making her jittery. It was the thought of sitting across from him and opening up in a way she hadn't done in years. It had been weeks since they'd exchanged small talk at the gym and daycare, and every conversation left Tasha feeling lighter, more herself than she'd felt in a long time. But still, there was hesitation. She wasn't sure if she was ready to let someone new into her life. Would she be able to trust again? Was she ready for something more than just a friendship? As the minutes ticked by, Tasha pushed those questions to the back of her mind and focused on the present moment, on Devon and the possibility of something real. When the door chimed, Tasha looked up and saw Devon walking toward her, a confident stride in his step. He was dressed casually in a grey hoodie and jeans, his hair pulled back in a loose ponytail, his brown eyes gleaming with a warmth that made her stomach flutter. "Hey, Tasha," he greeted, sitting down across from her with a relaxed smile. "I hope I didn't keep you waiting too long." "No, not at all," she replied, trying to hide the nervousness in her voice. "I was just thinking about everything. You know, the workouts, Elijah, life. It's all been kind of a blur." Devon nodded understandingly, his gaze never leaving hers. "I get it. You've been through a lot. And honestly, it's inspiring how much you've been able to accomplish on your own. Not everyone could juggle all the things you do." Tasha felt a wave of warmth spread through her at his words. "It hasn't been easy," she admitted, "but I've had no choice. Elijah deserves the best, and I owe it to myself to find happiness again." There was a brief silence between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Devon's presence felt calming, like a steady anchor in a world that had once been so turbulent for Tasha. "You're doing great," Devon said softly, "and I think you deserve more than just surviving. You deserve to thrive." His words struck something deep inside her, and for the first time, Tasha felt a spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, she could allow herself to have something more than just the struggles of her past. As they continued talking, the conversation flowed easily. They talked about everything: workouts, favorite foods, even their childhood memories. Tasha was surprised by how quickly she opened up. With Jason, there had always been walls between them, emotional barriers she'd built up over the years. But with Devon, she felt like she could be herself, completely. When they parted ways later that afternoon, Tasha felt lighter, as though a weight had been lifted from her chest. Devon had made her feel heard and seen in a way she hadn't experienced in years. She wasn't just a mother, a gym-goer, or a woman recovering from heartbreak. She was a person with her own dreams, her own desires, and she was worthy of love, respect, and happiness. That night, as Tasha prepared Elijah's bedtime routine, she couldn't help but think about the conversation with Devon. Maybe it was too soon to tell where things would go between them, but she had a feeling that this was the beginning of something special, something real. Meanwhile, Jason's life was continuing to spiral. Maya's demands had only grown more frequent: shopping sprees, expensive dinners, extravagant gifts. At first, Jason had indulged her, wanting to make her happy, to prove he could still provide the lifestyle she wanted. But now the bills were piling up. His savings were dwindling, and his credit cards were maxed out. But he didn't care. The thrill of impressing Maya kept him going, even though he knew deep down that it couldn't last forever. One evening, after a particularly lavish dinner where Maya had insisted on a shopping spree afterward, Jason sat alone in his apartment, staring at his credit card statement. The numbers didn't lie. He was sinking into debt faster than he could dig himself out, and yet Maya still expected more. His phone buzzed with a message from her. "Hey babe, can you send me another $5K for my trip to Miami next month?" Jason rubbed his eyes, trying to suppress the anxiety building in his chest, but he didn't want to disappoint her. He didn't want to lose the fantasy he'd built around their relationship. So, he picked up the phone and dialed his bank, already knowing what the answer would be. The balance on his credit line was already at its limit. There was no more money to give. "Jason," Maya's voice echoed in his ear when she picked up. "I need this money, babe. I'm counting on you." "I don't think I can give you the full amount right now," Jason said, his voice cracking under the pressure. I'm struggling to keep up with everything." There was a long pause, and then Maya's voice dropped, turning cold. "You're not serious right now, are you? I'm with you because you said you could provide. Don't make me look bad, Jason." He winced at her words. He had been so desperate to impress her, so eager to keep up the facade of success, that he hadn't realized how deep into debt he was. But now, reality was hitting him hard. Jason couldn't keep up this charade forever. "I'll figure something out," he said, his voice low and defeated. He didn't have the heart to tell her the truth, that he was on the brink of financial ruin. As Jason ended the call, he felt a pit grow in his stomach. The perfect life he had created for himself with Maya was beginning to crack, and he could no longer ignore the consequences of his choices. See, Miami had always been a place of excess, a playground for the rich and the glamorous. Maya knew this better than anyone. She had only been with Jason for a few months, but his willingness to spoil her had already exceeded her expectations. When he had offered to pay for the trip, she had smiled sweetly, knowing full well that it would serve as an introduction to the lavish lifestyle she craved. She had never planned to fall for Jason. In fact, she had never really planned on any kind of real relationship. She was in it for one thing: security. Jason was a means to an end. He was charming, easy to manipulate, and, at least in the beginning, willing to buy her affection with his wallet. But like all men who were desperate to keep her, Jason had been too easy to control. Maya had known this from the start, but Miami had changed everything. There, she had met someone who would make Jason look like a beginner in the world of wealth and privilege. At a glamorous rooftop bar overlooking the city skyline, Maya had crossed paths with Alex, a successful real estate mogul with connections to the most elite circles. He was everything Jason was not: handsome, suave, and most importantly, loaded. Their conversation started innocently enough, just two strangers chatting over overpriced cocktails, but by the end of the night, Maya found herself intrigued. His interest was clear, and she had no intention of turning him down. Over the next few days, their connection deepened, and Maya was mesmerized by Alex's wealth. He didn't ask her for anything, not the way Jason did. He didn't demand constant attention, didn't feel the need to validate himself by buying her expensive gifts. He was a man of power, and that power was more intoxicating than anything Jason had ever offered. But Maya wasn't about to let Jason off the hook just yet. She had him exactly where she wanted him. Jason was still calling her, texting her constantly, desperate for her attention. He was still paying for everything: luxury hotels, dinners, shopping sprees. But Maya had no intention of ending it with him. Not until she had drained him completely. The days in Miami were filled with contradictions. Jason's constant calls, the late-night conversations with Alex, and the new excitement she had discovered with someone who could give her everything Jason couldn't. She played both men expertly, keeping Jason on a string while weaving a web of deceit around him. Each time Jason asked her what she had been doing, she offered only the bare minimum: a few vague answers about enjoying the sights, soaking up the sun, and meeting new people. He never suspected a thing. Maya knew exactly how to keep him hooked. She would compliment him just enough to keep his ego inflated. When he mentioned how much money he had spent on her during the trip, she would play it off with a laugh, pretending it didn't matter, pretending she didn't care. But inside, she was smiling. She was close, so close to getting everything she wanted from him. Jason, of course, was blind to all of it. His desire to make her happy, to prove his worth, kept him stuck in her trap. He didn't know that, behind his back, Maya had already begun to distance herself emotionally. She wasn't interested in his love. She was interested in his wealth. Maya's scheme continued to unfold as the days passed. She encouraged Jason to book one last extravagant dinner for their final night in Miami. She knew exactly what she was doing. By the time they boarded the flight back to Atlanta, Maya had drained Jason's bank accounts even further. She had convinced him to buy her jewelry, clothing, and a new designer handbag, things she'd never needed, but things that would keep him in her clutches. And just like that, with a final kiss and a promise to call him when she got back, Maya left Jason. Meanwhile, back in Atlanta, Tasha was moving forward with her own life, unaware of the extent to which Jason's delusion was spiraling. She had become more confident, more sure of herself every day. Her body was taking on a new shape, but it wasn't just her body. It was her spirit that had begun to change. She found herself spending more time at the gym, building strength, and at work, making strides toward financial independence. When she saw herself in the mirror now, it wasn't just the reflection of someone who had been abandoned. It was the reflection of someone who had reclaimed her power. She felt stronger than ever, more in control of her future. It was late one evening when she was at the grocery store, picking up a few essentials. As she turned the corner in the produce aisle, she nearly collided with someone. "Sorry about that," she said, looking up to see none other than Jason standing in front of her. For a split second, Tasha felt a wave of old emotions flood her chest, but she quickly shut them down. This wasn't the man who had broken her. This was just a person, a man who had lost everything he had, all for a woman who cared nothing for him. Jason looked different. His clothes were a little more disheveled, his face a little more tired. He had the look of someone who had been living on borrowed time. His eyes widened when he saw Tasha. There was no surprise in his gaze, only a fleeting recognition of the woman she had become. "Tasha," he said, his voice thick with hesitation, "you look different." Tasha stood tall, her confidence radiating through the air. She wasn't the woman he had discarded. She wasn't the same woman who had been broken by his betrayal. "Yeah, I've been working on myself." For a brief moment, Jason seemed to realize that he wasn't the one holding the power anymore. It was Tasha. She had found herself again, and she was better for it. But he couldn't dwell on it for too long. His thoughts were already consumed by the mounting pressure from Maya's demands. "Well, good to see you," he muttered, shifting uncomfortably. Tasha simply nodded, a faint smile curving her lips. "Take care, Jason." And with that, she turned and walked away, leaving him standing in the aisle, lost in his own guilt, while she continued on her path to a new life, one that didn't include him. The days were getting longer, the air warmer, and Tasha's spirit brighter. She had kept her head down and worked hard for the past few months, and now the fruits of her labor were becoming apparent. She had dropped the weight, built muscle, and not just physically. Her mind was sharp, her resolve unbreakable. Every small victory in the gym translated into bigger victories in her life. Tasha's new job at the fitness center was a dream come true, something she had worked toward for months. She was learning, growing, and finally beginning to see the success she had always hoped for. Elijah was thriving too, happy, healthy, and no longer asking for the father who had abandoned them. But even in the calm, Tasha felt the pull of something else, something big. She had found her purpose, but there was still one more piece of the puzzle left: love. And as life would have it, that's when Devon's hand grazed hers in the coffee shop again, this time with an unmistakable warmth. They hadn't seen each other in a few weeks, but the connection had only grown stronger in the distance. Devon was kind, patient, and when he looked at her, Tasha could feel he saw her for who she was, someone worthy of love, respect, and happiness, and he didn't hesitate to let her know that. "Hey, Tasha," Devon said, his voice low and warm, as they stood outside her office one evening. "I've been thinking a lot about you lately." Tasha smiled, feeling the nervous flutter in her chest, the kind she hadn't felt in ages. "What do you mean?" she asked, though she already knew. "I think we've both been through a lot, and I'd like to take you out. Let's not overthink it." There it was, the moment she had been waiting for, the future she could see, clear and full of promise, right in front of her. "I'd like that," she said with a soft smile, her heart beating a little faster. She knew she was ready to take a chance on love again. Meanwhile, Jason's life was collapsing in slow motion. The weight of his decisions, the affair with Maya, the reckless spending, the constant need for validation, was starting to suffocate him. Maya had squeezed him dry. He had spent every last penny he had to keep up with her demands, and now he was nearing the end of his financial rope. He had nothing left to offer, nothing but empty promises and desperate apologies that Maya had no intention of accepting. But he didn't know how to stop. He was addicted to the high of impressing Maya, to the illusion that he could still prove himself to someone. But the truth was, Maya had already moved on. She was with Alex now, her real source of wealth, and she had no interest in maintaining her facade with Jason. Jason had been nothing more than a stepping stone for her, and now he was just a casualty in her rise to the top. Maya didn't even bother with Jason anymore. He had become a nuisance, too needy, too desperate, and far too broke to keep up the lifestyle she had come to expect. She had been playing him from the start, and now, with Alex by her side, she was more than set. But Jason was starting to see the cracks in the facade. Maya wasn't calling him as much. She wasn't even pretending to care. He'd gotten the last "I miss you" text weeks ago, and now, all that was left was the crushing realization that he had been used. One afternoon, Jason made the mistake of checking his bank account. The numbers were red, so far gone that he couldn't even comprehend how much he had spent. The late fees, the credit card bills, the loans he had taken out, all were now impossible to ignore. He wasn't just financially ruined, he was emotionally wrecked. He had nothing left. Tasha's life, however, was on the upswing. The date with Devon had gone beautifully. Dinner, laughter, and moments of connection that made her heart swell. She had taken a chance, and for the first time in a long while, she felt truly seen. But it was more than that. She was seeing herself. She was embracing her worth, her beauty, and her strength. She didn't need Jason. She didn't need anyone to validate her. As she walked home that night, Tasha's phone buzzed. She didn't even recognize the number. "Tasha, we need to talk." It was Jason, and something about it felt different this time. The following day, Jason showed up at Tasha's door. His clothes were wrinkled, his face worn. There was no arrogance in his steps, no confident swagger that had once made him seem invincible. Instead, he looked broken. "Tasha," he started, his voice low. "I need help. I've messed everything up. I'm ruined. I need you. Please." Tasha stared at him, feeling a coldness in her chest. The man who had called her fat, the one who had torn apart their family, was standing at her doorstep, asking for help. "Jason," she said quietly, her voice calm but firm. "You had your chance. You made your choices. You hurt me, you hurt Elijah, and now you're reaping the consequences. I can't help you." The finality in her words hit harder than anything he had ever said to her. She wasn't angry. She wasn't bitter. She was simply done. "I'm sorry," she added, turning away, leaving him standing there, defeated. The day Jason had been dreading had finally arrived. Everything had fallen apart. The last of his savings had evaporated, and with it, any semblance of the life he had once known. The money that had once been his security was now nothing more than an empty memory, and Maya, who had promised him everything and given him nothing, had vanished from his life as if she had never existed. He'd been a fool to believe in her, but the worst part, he had no one to blame but himself. The woman he had thrown away, Tasha, had become everything he could never be: strong, self-sufficient, happy. And now, as he stood outside her apartment, the reality of his actions came crashing down in waves. His phone buzzed again. Maya once more, asking for more money. He had nothing left to give, and the desperation in his heart grew even more suffocating. Jason felt like a shadow of himself, the man who once commanded attention, who once thought he could have anything he wanted, was now nothing. He had been outsmarted by Maya, who had used him and discarded him, and by Tasha, who had rebuilt herself and created a life without him. As if on instinct, Jason knocked on Tasha's door. His palms were sweating, his body shaking. This was it, the last chance. When Tasha opened the door, her expression was unreadable. She was no longer the woman who had cried after he left her. This woman stood tall, confident, and full of a quiet strength. Her eyes, though calm, held a depth that Jason couldn't fathom. "Tasha," he said, his voice weak. "I need help." She didn't flinch. Instead, she crossed her arms over her chest, giving him the space to continue. "I know I've hurt you, and I'm sorry," he said, his words faltering. "I've lost everything. My job, my money, my dignity. I don't know where else to turn." Tasha looked at him, really looked at him, before speaking. "Jason," she said slowly, "you had your chance. You left me. You chose another woman. You called me fat. You abandoned your son. Now, you want me to fix you? I'm not your savior. I'm not here to fix your broken life." His shoulders slumped, and for the first time, he saw the woman he had once known, strong, unyielding. She wasn't the same Tasha he had abandoned. No, she had become someone else, someone better. "I know you're angry," he continued, his voice trembling now. "I was wrong, but I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't know what to do anymore." Tasha paused, then shook her head, her lips tight with resolve. "I won't be the woman who takes care of you anymore, Jason. You have to learn to live with the consequences of your actions. I've moved on. Elijah and I have moved on, and it's time for you to do the same." Jason felt the weight of her words press down on him, and for a brief moment, he wished he could take it all back, the hurtful words, the betrayal, the destruction, but he couldn't. It was too late. "I'm sorry," he whispered again, almost to himself. Tasha didn't respond. She didn't need to. The message was clear. You made your choices. Now you deal with them. Later that week, the consequences of Jason's reckless decisions started to unfold, as the bills and debts he had tried to hide from Tasha began to catch up with him. First, there was the foreclosure notice on his condo. Then came the calls from his creditors, the ones he had been ignoring, demanding payments he couldn't make. But it didn't end there. Maya, having moved on to Alex, finally made her move. She sent Jason a message, telling him she'd taken everything he had, drained his accounts, and left him with nothing. Her final words to him echoed in his mind. "You were never worth the money I spent on you." Jason had been nothing but a pawn in her game, a tool she had used to elevate herself, and now he was nothing more than an afterthought. Meanwhile, Tasha had reached the pinnacle of her success. The gym she had opened had flourished, and her clients adored her. She had earned her certification as a personal trainer and was finally in a position to hire staff, expanding her dream into a full-fledged business. Elijah was thriving, growing into the happy, healthy boy she had always wanted him to be. But the most important thing, she had found love, real love. Devon had been her constant support, never once asking for anything in return. Their relationship was built on trust, respect, and mutual admiration. As they sat together on the balcony of her new home, sipping wine under the stars, Tasha realized how far she had come. "I'm so proud of you, Tasha," Devon said one evening as he held her close. "You've worked so hard for this. You deserve everything." Tasha smiled, feeling the weight of his words. It had been a long road, but she had done it. She had reclaimed her life, and now she was ready to live it fully. As she looked out at the city skyline, her thoughts wandered to Jason, not with anger or regret, but with a sense of peace. She had outgrown him, outgrown the pain. She was stronger, wiser, and more fulfilled than she had ever been. And Jason? He was nothing more than a distant memory, a reminder of what could happen when someone chose greed and vanity over love and family.